Do you think he was a better match for the political life in comparison to the soldier life?
There's military historians love to dump on Washington because, in fact, as a commander, he made some mistakes. And the longer he was a commander, just to be crude, he didn't get tremendously better. He had good innings and he had bad innings. So I think he actually was a better political leader. But there were qualities he brought to his military leadership which were terribly important and were inspirational. And we tend to gloss over this sometimes. I think earlier histories did not. He was insanely brave. Soldiers respect that. You go to a battle, you may well die. It's really terrifying. And Washington never backed down. He was crazy lucky. He was never got a scratch. And he would emerge from the battle with bullet holes in his coat and in his hat. He faced as much danger as anybody on the field, even when he was a general. And that is something his fellow soldiers always respected. That was a form of leadership that was more important in those days than it is today. Today, it's much more technological. But so it's not that he was an inept military leader. He was not a brilliant military leader. I think as a political leader, for his time, he was pretty close to brilliant.
Hmm. Yeah, I want to get into that political, the way he moved in politics too in a second. But what you also wrote in your book is that at Valley Forge, he stayed with his men and listened. Valley Forge, if I'm correct, was a moment in his career that didn't go well, correct? That was one of the key moments of, you could say, kind of like a decline or a mistake.
Well, they'd spent the year before. There had only been two battles, and they'd lost both of them. And there was the custom in the 18th century that you would not fight the war in the winter. It was very gentlemanly. So they went into camp outside of Philadelphia, and it was a North American winter. It was cold. It was not the coldest winter on record, but it was hard. And the soldiers were in terrible shape. They didn't have enough uniforms. They didn't have shoes. They had to build their own shelters. And they got sick. About 1,000 of them died of disease. And it was grim. It was just a grim 3 or 4 months. And Washington every day would leave his headquarters, get on his horse, and with an aide, would ride through the camp and talk to the men, show himself to them, that he was still there. He was still leading them as he could. If there was something he could fix, there's a dead horse carcass in the middle of the path. Well, that could be moved. He would make that happen. He would try to improve their lives in little ways. And it was a form of leadership which is intensely personal. And I think he understood that. There's a management guru named Tom Peters who 20 years ago described it as management by walking around. You can't lead an organization unless you actually see what they're doing and you see what the people look like, what talk to them. I've just been working on a project about our World War II General George Patton, and he insisted that he had to go to the front, and it was a time when generals didn't do that, and he took risks, but he said, I need to see the men. if I can look in their faces, I can see how much more they can take. And if I don't see them, I don't know that. And I think that form of personal connection is extremely valuable. And I think it may account in large part for the time, the long time Washington was the American leader. He had that ability to just show up, always be there, and do what he could. And, as miserable as they were, the soldiers understood that he was doing what he could, and they appreciated that.
Mm-hmm. Is that something you see often in the figures you've studied? Is that they think often about the morale of the soldiers because their decision making will be better than too, because I can imagine it's hard to make decisions if you don't know how your soldiers are feeling at that moment, like what's the morale like of the army. Same with, I mean, you can even find it in like founders, entrepreneurs, like knowing the morale of your employees, and from that information you can make way better decisions, correct?
Absolutely. You once you're trying to do something large, you need other people to help, and that you can only judge their capabilities by knowing them and by understanding what they can do and what they can't do. And you know you don't get that sitting in your office. I practiced law for many years and was involved with many organizations as representing them, and I always cringed when a leader would say, "I have an open door policy." It's a terrible idea. You may have an open door, but nobody's going through it. You need to get out that door. You need to go through the door and go find out what's happening. That's your job. It's not their job to come tell you, and they're not gonna. So uh, I think Washington understood that.
Yeah, I think many leaders, failed leaders, might believe that they are maybe even too good to speak to the common soldier, to even take the time for that, and they should spend most of their time on more the tactical side of winning the war, winning the battle, or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, there is there's a lot to worry about when you're leading an army. There's the logistics are horrible, and just feeding them is impossible, and trying to keep them healthy. So there is a great deal to pay attention to, but uh, you can't overlook the human part. Again, I have George Patton on my mind, but he always insisted that his soldiers salute correctly. And he was a real pain in the neck about it. He would fine people for not saluting correctly. And he said once, well, if you can't get them to salute, how are you going to get them to die for their country? And,
Good point.
yeah, I mean, you need to have that shared understanding of what you're about.
Mm. Yeah, it's like the thing that all the USA soldiers always need to make their bed, right? Before battle. Like make sure they make their bed, make sure they salute well. So the basics are done, and then from the basics, if the whole army does that, I can imagine it's very hard for morale to be quite low.
Well, it's a complicated thing, but discipline is the basis of any organization.
Mm-hmm. You wrote, he endured setbacks, worked with diverse leaders, and kept support. How was he able to maintain some form of loyalty from his units during these hard times? You mentioned like the visiting them was also like a part of it, maybe like promising them something or anything else.
Well, I might turn that around. I think a lot of it was telling them the truth and not promising things he couldn't deliver. When he's riding around the Valley Forge camp, I imagine he said, we're trying hard to get some more food here. We know you need more food. I don't think he said, we'll have a hot meal for you at lunchtime. because he didn't know that. And you don't want to get hopes up and then disappointed, and then you're the liar. You're the one who can't be trusted. So you don't sugarcoat things. You tell people the truth, and that's important.
Did he share their sufferings? Like you see, for example, with Alexander the Great, that during these very difficult times, that even he wouldn't drink a drop of water. Is that something Washington also did?
Well, he was the commander in chief, and he was in his late 40s and early 50s. So I don't think anybody resented him, sleeping in a tent.
Mm-hmm.
And he rode the horse himself. He was a great horseman, and so he would, but he wasn't marching. He wasn't, he was the commander. He had a few privileges, but he also was out there. It was very cold and it was raining, and he was out there with them when they went across the Delaware River to the Battle of Trenton. He was out there in the snow with them, and that is part of leadership. You do have to share some of the hard times, and I think he succeeded with that. He was. It's a fascinating thing. Through his life, he got sick a good deal. He had several serious bouts of illness, but not when he was leading the army. Not when he was really killing himself every day and in rough conditions. And he responded to those challenges.